Welcome back to the Swamp 24/7 podcast. I'm Thomas Goldcamp here with Blake Alderman. Blake, it's been a little more than a week since our last episode, so we have quite a good bit to catch up on. I think let's start this episode talking about Billy Napier just continuing to round out his staff. In the last week and a half or so, there have been two new additions to the on-field staff. Linebackers coach Mike Peterson has been brought over from South Carolina. I want to talk to you about him a little bit because you probably have a better idea of how he's regarded on the recruiting trail. But obviously, Florida fans are quite familiar with Mike Peterson, a guy that was a standout player back in the day at Florida. Put together a really fantastic NFL career. I think brings a lot of charisma, I think, as a recruiter, Blake. Jordan Burch is a guy that I know was a five-star prospect. He landed at South Carolina. But from your angle and talking to other coaches and other recruiting site reporters around the network, what do you expect Mike Peterson to bring in that regard?
I think him being on the younger side, as relative as, coaching, he's not, as young as maybe a Christian Robinson from the former staff, but I still think that he is able to relate to a lot of players. I think having, being a guy that has played in the SEC, has played in the NFL, I think it's something that'll be regarded on the recruiting trail. Coming from South Carolina, their unit at linebackers, they always fielded a pretty good unit, so I think that that's something to put your hat on. Just being a guy that has played at Florida, has ties to Florida, to Gainesville. I think that where you see a lot of the passion kind of come through on the recruiting trail, you get kind of a different energy whenever you're recruiting for your alma mater. Mm-hmm. So I think that that'll be good on the recruiting trail for them. I don't know that he's really regarded as, an elite recruiter or an ace recruiter or anything like that, but he's still a very good recruiter. You named Jordan Burch, a big guy that, was a big target for South Carolina there. That was kind of a culmination of the entire staff at South Carolina recruiting him, but he was very much involved with him. He's landed some other guys at South Carolina. I'm interested to see how he does once he gets with Florida. But again, I think that energy of him wanting to, kind of represent that SEC, having, the army of recruiting staffers and off-field people that Napier has, along with being able to be assisted by other guys on this recruiting staff. Because when you talk to these recruits, it's not just one or two coaches that, these guys are talking to. Sometimes it's 4 or 5 guys, throw in some of those recruiting office guys. So a lot of these, kids, that are being recruited by Florida are dealing with a lot of coaches. So that'll give him some backup. That'll give him a chance to kind of shine. So I'm excited to see how he really gets after it. And, with the kids coming in this weekend, Florida's gonna have a big 5-star linebacker on campus. So this is his chance to, really relate to, that guy and really try to, get in the ear of an elite prospect, not just on Florida's board, but just around the country.
Blake, I know we're going to talk recruiting in the second half, but that 5-star guy you're talking about is Harold Perkins?
Correct.
Okay. So
I didn't say the name because I knew we were talking about him later.
Yeah, I didn't want to steal your thunder from the second half of the show. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. I think, Blake, anytime you can get former players onto your staff, it's a good thing. And I always, we always go back and forth with fans, particularly on the message board at Swamp 24/7, about how big a deal that is. I don't know that it should be a, deciding factor in a hire. But to me, there's a lot of benefits there. And one of the big benefits I think we've seen already play out with some of Billy Napier's kind of targeted staff hires is he clearly wants to build that network of alumni and guys that have ties to the program. How big a deal is that for you, Blake?
For me personally, I think it's good because, getting those players to come back, I thought that was something that Mullen did a good job of, just because previously you didn't see a lot of guys come back to, Florida to talk to the team, to be around the team. With Mike Peterson, I believe the title is, Alumni liaison or something, something to that effect. I think it's good that he's putting an emphasis on that because Mike Peterson can get those guys, having Kewan Ratliff on the other staff, when Mullen was here, I thought that was good because he knew a lot of former players. Again, they had a lot of guys come back. Mullen being a former assistant coach at Florida, he had a lot of guys come to practice to talk to the players. I think that those things are beneficial to talk to those guys that have, won at the highest level at Florida, whether it's a national championship, an SEC championship. So I think still keeping that thought alive with a guy like Mike Peterson, I think is really important to Florida.
Yeah, and Peterson's not the only one, Blake. Florida announced today that they have hired Chester Blackshear, who was an offensive lineman who started 28 games for Florida from 1996 to 1999, was on the 96 national title team. A guy that, I know has ties to Shannon Snell and some of the other more vocal kind of Spurrier era guys. And I think the more different, kind of pieces you can pull from I think the better. And Chester Blackshear is a guy that's coming over after spending 4 years at Dartmouth. Has a bit of a lengthy coaching career, but hasn't maybe gotten a big break yet. He's coming in as a quality control assistant on the offensive line. I think when you look at that type of a hire, where maybe probably off the radar for most fans, maybe even a lot of analysts when you put together, coaching hot boards, I think that shows to me that Billy Napier has a plan of wanting to maximize alumni engagement, wanting to get the fan base in it. And when he talks about the fans really being a huge part of the operation, one way to get the fans involved is have players that, they're familiar with that can sell, what Florida should be, what Florida used to be, when you were firing on all cylinders. And I think, retaining Vernell Brown, I think that's another key part. Vernell Brown's from the Urban Meyer tree and that period of success. I think the more guys that you can bring from different, periods of success in Florida history, the more you can talk to them about what went well. And, for a guy like Chester Blackshear, obviously Florida has 2 offensive line coaches, and we'll talk about Rob Sale's hire in just a second. But when you get a third guy in there that has legitimate coaching experience at the college level, and he's coming in as a quality control analyst at his alma mater, a place that, obviously he has a lot of love for, won a national title at, you have, as Billy Napier, can then begin to evaluate that guy and see, okay, what does he bring to the table? Is he ready for a step up, to the SEC level? And I think it just shows a lot of foresight from Billy Napier. It reads a lot to me like he had a list of, guys that are Florida alumni that are in coaching, and maybe you can get a Mike Peterson right on your on-field staff, and he's ready for that kind of role. But also, who are some of these other guys that went to Florida and are interested in getting into coaching at maybe a higher level? And Chester Blackshear, I think, is a guy like that. I love the idea of bringing in alumni from different parts of Florida football history. But Blake, let's talk about Rob Sale. He's a guy that obviously very early on, after Billy Napier was hired, we had circled as a guy that fans needed to watch. Felt very confident for a long time that he would be on this coaching staff. NFL season ended on Sunday. Rob Sale brought aboard, I believe, officially yesterday. But we kind of knew that was going to happen. Blake, what are your initial thoughts on Rob Sale, both as a coach and a recruiter, from what you've heard?
As a recruiter, I'm not really familiar with him as a recruiter. He was at Georgia. He was able to land some guys, for Georgia when he was there. Georgia, obviously it's a big logo. It's a big SEC team. That's a team where, recruiting, it's not hard to recruit when you're in the SEC. As far as ULL, I think he was known as more of a developer. And I think you've seen a lot of those guys, a team like ULL that not a lot of people. I mean, if you're a casual college football fan and you follow the big Power 5 type teams, you might not know ULL, but to see those types of teams, so those guys from that team get drafted that were under his coaching. I think that shows the big development. And I think that's something that Florida's offensive line obviously needs. Obviously infusing talent is a big thing just because they need to continue to add those 4 or 5-star type of guys, those top 100 big time players. That's how you win the SEC. You build that great wall around your offense. So if he can do that, you obviously having 2 offensive line coaches, you can be able to kind of tag team a lot of these offensive linemen on the trail. Again, kind of having the help from other coaches that are involved, whether it's an area recruiter or just, the head coach calling kids as frequently as Billy Napier does. But as far as, coaching, I think that it's good that he has a lot of ties with Napier. And I think the success that Napier had at ULL as far as, the run game, he's really known for running the ball. Obviously, it starts up front with the offensive line. You have a guy that you were successful with in Rob Sale, and they'll look to continue that type of success at Florida. So that type of chemistry, I think, can be good. We'll see how things go on the field whenever they start playing these games, if that chemistry does translate to the SEC. But chemistry is a good thing within a coaching staff, and I think that's the biggest thing that it sticks out to me that Sale brings.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's funny, depending on how involved you are on message boards, Twitter, whatever your medium for kind of consuming Florida news is, you may have a different impression of certain things. If you're listening to Georgia fans or New York Giants fans, where Rob Sale spent 2021 with the Giants, didn't have a very good offensive line. The Giants weren't very good. And you listen to Georgia fans from 2015 when Rob Sale was there, the final year of Mark Richt's tenure when things were kind of going south. Nobody who watched him at those 2 stops seems to have a very high opinion of him, but he was only there for 1 year. And so I made this point on Twitter yesterday is you can't really judge somebody on 1 year when they're walking into a situation where they didn't recruit those kids or they didn't, go out and draft those kids.
It's a crappy situation to be in, like you said, the end of Mark Richt's tenure, the Giants, I mean, they haven't been good even before he was there.
Right.
They've been on that downward spiral from, Eli Manning throwing touchdowns in the Super Bowl, several years back. So they've been on a downward spiral too. So I think you could even kind of throw in some idea of that. He was hired onto kind of a dead man walking type of staff.
Totally agree. And my point in saying that is, ESPN even quoted Rob Sale earlier this year when he was asked about the differences between coaching in college and coaching in the NFL. And he basically said, there's really not a whole lot of difference, right? Like you're coaching guys on technique and development. And at the end of the day, college or NFL, guys are still going through the same types of hurdles, to get them to perform the same type of off the field stuff for the most part in the NFL and college. But he said the difference is in one, you get to buy your groceries, right? You get to choose your groceries, meaning in the NFL, when you walk into a job, there's a GM that's in charge of the drafting, the head coach, there's some collaboration of vision. But it's not at all like recruiting in the college level where you really kind of set your draft board and you develop. And that's why I think.
And you're evaluating those guys sometimes as freshmen, underclassmen. So it's not like let's pop on the college tape and see how he did as a senior or junior. I mean, you're literally starting at, these kids coming to camps if they're in middle school,
exactly.
Even if you've got a guy that, comes to those camps while you're there that long. So,
exactly.
For sure.
And that's where I circle back to your point of like his stint at Louisiana for those 3 years was really, really good. Right. And he was there from, the first 3 years, wasn't there for the fourth year under Billy Napier. But if you look at Louisiana's line and how they developed, I mean, Robert Hunt got drafted in the second round in 2020. Kevin Dotson got drafted in the fourth round same year. So you're talking about 2 NFL prospects right there.
Cyrus Torrance, who's a transfer guy that was recruited by him. That's
very highly thought of.
20 or something in the transfer portal rankings.
Max Mitchell's
a guy that we can talk to later. But, there's some big time guys.
Yeah. At a place like Louisiana, to me, that's very impressive. And again, I think, like you said, you do have 2 offensive line coaches. You're bringing in guys like Blackshear who, won't be able to go on the road recruiting for you. But when you bring guys to campus, they're going to know, hey, there's a lot of different guys here. And I think you'll have different personalities to sell. But I think it's a fantastic hire for Florida. I really do, Blake. And, that brings us to 8 hires on the assistant coaching staff, only 2 more to go. So I think over the next couple days, we'll probably see some more movement. But Blake, I think
as far as the spots remaining, special teams coach seems like something Billy Napier wants a standalone, and then inside linebackers coach.
I think right now what's going to happen is defensive line coach. You need
defensive line coach. Defensive line.
Yeah,
right,
and then either linebackers or safeties coach. So how that shakes out remains to be seen based on how negotiations play out and who they can land. I think Patrick Toney could very much slide down to linebacker depending on how discussions go with other candidates. I would expect the special teams to be handled by an off-the-field staffer. You get a certain number of guys that are not on the assistant coaching staff that can be on the headsets on game day. So if you put an off-the-field staffer in charge of special teams, they can spend all the time drawing up special team scheme, teaching it during the week, and then they can be on the headset, on game day. I don't think they're going to have a dedicated on-field coach.
Which I thought that was kind of strange whenever Napier did say that in his introductory press conference, that they'd have a coach for special teams. It's just so it's like, it's important to have a kicker on scholarship. It's one of those positions to where you can get away with it as a walk-on if you've got a guy that's talented enough that'll come in. Maybe not so much for Florida this past season, but it's just special teams seems like something that you could have an off the field guy try to handle and really leave those on field, coaching jobs for the guys that are, sorry, kickers and punters, but coaching more important spots.
Yeah, and I think it'll still be a team effort, right? Like you saw under Dan Mullen, when you're actually in practice, it's going to be on-field assistant coaches that are also coaching guys through special teams drills. But as far as the organization of it,
right, as a dedicated singular coach for that,
Right. Blake, you mentioned Cyrus Torrance. Can you give us the latest on him and running back Montreal Harris? They're 2 guys that played at Louisiana, have entered the transfer portal. There's at least some interest in Florida. Just give us the quick scoop on both of those guys.
Yeah, like you said, Montreal Johnson, he's the running back, former ULL running back. Cyrus Torrance is a former interior offensive lineman from ULL, has been a 3-year starter there. I believe, like I said, he was, I think, number 15, 20, somewhere around that effect as far as the transfer portal rankings go. Both have been re-ranked by 24/7 Sports as far as when they entered the transfer portal as 4-star players. So I actually have both of them with a 24/7 Sports crystal ball for transfers. I have them both pegged to Florida. I think Montreal Johnson at this point is a guy that I feel a little bit more confident on. I definitely feel like that's kind of a, more of a, when and not a, when he's going to make that decision to come to Florida and not a where is he going type of decision. I think that's one that, you could see Florida make some type of announcement or him make some type of announcement. I could see that happening in the near future. Cyrus Torrance, again, as a guy that I've had a pick in for a while, I felt confident on him ending up at Florida. It's tricky because drop ad was on the 11th of this month, yesterday, which is just passed. So there's some leeway there with as far as getting in after drop ad. I believe for transfer athletes, there's waivers, there's all sorts of things that are way above my knowledge level of really knowing how the inner workings of, scholastics work. And, but there does seem like, at least from Torrance's thoughts, that he has some leeway to whenever he could enroll, if that's, at Florida or somewhere else that already has passed a drop ad. Florida staff has continued to feel really confident on him. But Torrance has really wanted to take some visits. He's already done an official visit to Auburn, I believe, which was the 5th of this month. Something to that effect, whenever transfers could start taking those official visits. He's told me that he plans to be at LSU on Thursday of this week. Ole Miss and Florida are some other trips he's mentioned taking, but no visits have been etched in. This is a guy that's coming in. He's taking a one-day official visit to these schools. He doesn't feel like he needs to spend the entire weekend, see all the bells and whistles. He wants to get, the meat and bones and, of those types of visits and see the, what I need to be successful there, because I'm probably only going to be here 1 year at the max. I mean, he's one of those guys that's looking at an NFL prospect. I don't think he needs to see, oh, wow, there's someone riding a horse right in front of my house. How about that? Well, don't see that every day. But
Lakeland,
Polk County, y'all. But, again, he's a guy that, he seems to be kind of taking a business-like approach, seeing these schools, weighing his options. He's got a bunch of offers, some that he's reported on his Twitter, some that he hasn't. But I still have gotten the vibe that Florida continues to feel confident there. We'll see what his timeline. He says that he plans on being somewhere for the spring semester. Again, he says there's some leeway there on when he can enroll in a school because, again, schools around the country are starting to hit those drop ad dates, and he's still taking visits. But, as far as I know, Florida still feels confident. I'm still rolling my pick on Florida, but he's probably the one of those two ULL transfer guys that I'm keeping a little bit closer of an eye on. And that's just more because I feel like Johnson is kind of, again, a thing to where it's just, we're waiting on an announcement of some sort, because I do feel confident that he ends up at Florida.
Like, did Mackie Gardner commit to LSU, the Louisiana cornerback transfer?
I thought he did yesterday. So, and that's a guy that, before it was rumored he was going to be entering the portal, a lot of people pegged him to go to Florida. Whenever he actually did enter the transfer portal, there really didn't seem to be much traction between him and Florida. So, it's a lot of guys thought early on that was a guy who was kind of a foregone conclusion that he ended up at Florida. I was saying, whenever he entered the portal, it just didn't seem to add up, where you got a guy like Torrance and, Johnson, whenever those guys entered the portal, it seemed like Florida really immediately had that interest, and you didn't get that type of interest from Gardner. So, but he did commit to LSU. That's where he'll spend his next, I believe, 2 years of playing eligibility.
Yeah, I want to wrap up this first half of the segment talking about a couple other players, because I think Florida's numbers are good in the secondary, and that's kind of where I was going with that. Trey Dean has announced he'll be back as a super senior next year. So I think that he's a guy that obviously, his first 3 years at Florida really didn't have a fit. I think the old staff didn't quite know where to put him, went from cornerback to nickelback, and then eventually to safety. Just, his junior year at safety in 2020, he was behind the three other seniors, Steiner, Sean Davis, and Brad Stewart. And so he just didn't play a whole lot. I thought he played pretty well this year. I think he finished as Florida's leading tackler. Still some areas of his game that he can clean up. But I think when you get him working with a guy like potentially a Patrick Toney, if he's, at safeties and not linebackers. I think the coaching
is a big thing for him. Whenever you saw Weston McGriff come in, you saw Trey Dean elevate his game.
A lot better.
Patrick Toney can continue on that track. You could, again, see him get a lot better.
So I think that's a key retention for Florida. And then I guess, Blake, the three guys that have made announcements in the recent days are Kaiir Elam is going to head to the NFL. I know he was probably a little bit more torn on that decision than people might have expected, but I think anytime you're a first, second round type prospect, it's really hard to turn down that guaranteed contract. And he's such a hard worker. I barring injury, I have no doubt he'd be able to get a second contract as well. Running backs Dameon Pierce and Malik Davis also both off to the NFL. So Blake, as we talked about, I think Florida has a need at running back. Montreal Johnson, it seems like more a matter of
just added Trevor Etienne as well.
Just added Trevor Etienne
during the All-American Bowl, so they're definitely putting some attention to that running back position.
And that's a spot we talked about they had to shore up. So Florida, I think, doing a good job of starting to balance out the roster. It seems very clear that Billy Napier is aware of class balance. I think that's why one of the reasons you saw them not really go after Mackie Gardner much. But I think Florida roster starting to take shape. I think it's very clear that Billy Napier has a plan. Blake, part of that plan is going to involve recruiting, specifically a major recruiting weekend on tap. So let's take a quick break. I'll come back and talk to you on the other side about what we can expect from Florida's major official visit weekend coming up. Welcome back to the Swamp 24/7 podcast. I'm Thomas Goldcamp here with Blake Alderman. Blake, this is one of the bigger official visit weekends that I've seen for Florida in a long time. And a big part of that is Florida only signed 9 guys in the early signing period. So you kind of have two factors playing out here. One, Florida's kind of running up against the 85-man scholarship limit. So it's not going to be a huge class in the first place. But two, they wanted to kind of be patient and see what played out after the early signing period because they do want to hit on the right evals. They don't want to take guys just to take guys. So who are maybe the top couple guys on this weekend's official visitor list? We probably don't have to get to every guy that's going to visit, but who are some of the top guys?
Yeah, I'll be doing this show till tomorrow.
I know. Yeah.
All these names.
Who are maybe the top 4 to 5 guys that you think Florida is probably trying to get in the boat that even the casual fans should probably know about going into this weekend?
We already mentioned Harold Perkins earlier in the show, having a 5-star linebacker, having the number 1 linebacker in the country on campus. I think that's a big deal. I think that heading into that visit, they're definitely working hard. You have Napier, you have Tony, you have Jamar Chaney in the off-field role. I'm sure Mike Peterson, now that he's been hired, has been involved. So you have a large group, Joe Hamilton, who has ties to the Texas area in the off-field role. You have a lot of guys that are working on Harold Perkins. Even a guy like Kamari Wilson, who's already been signed and enrolled at Florida. He'll be in his ear. He was in his ear during the Under Armour week of practice. He's committed to Texas A&M. He did commit to them earlier this month during the Under Armour game, has not been shy whatsoever about saying that he was going to take visits after the fact, that he did not sign early with Texas A&M. Florida was one of those visits that he has always consistently said, even during Under Armour, when the date wasn't set, that I'm going to visit Florida. I know I'm definitely going to visit Florida. That's been set for this weekend. LSU is another visit that's been kicked around. I believe he's also in the Polynesian Bowl, which is the weekend of January 21st. I'm out there in Hawaii, which is like the greatest thing in the world. I mean, you get a week in Hawaii.
You heading out there?
I wish. I need to try to find
that
a way
on the
to
expense
that
report,
one.
man.
Yeah, exactly. So, that game has really turned into a big, all-star type of game. Maybe not as, as an Army game or an Under Armour type of game, but they've got some good players. Perkins is one of those big players that'll be on Florida's campus this weekend. Another high 4-star top 40 type of guy that's going to be on campus is safety Jacoby Matthews, who's been a really familiar name for Florida fans for most of this cycle. Really earlier on in the year 2021, back in, I believe, January, he was offered. He was talking a lot with Keiron Ratliff, had a lot of interest. They were waiting for Weston McGriff to get hired. Once he was hired, they offered. He was really into Florida, but just was never able to make a visit to Gainesville, was talking to them a bunch. I believe it was in the earlier part of the summer or in the later part of the spring. He committed to LSU, the in-state school, backed off of that. Corey Raymond was involved in that. And that's another tie that has carried over. He did back off that commitment in the later part of the summer, has already taken visits to Texas and Texas A&M. Florida will be the first visit out of the gate. Alabama's a visit that's been mentioned, LSU going back there to spend time with that new staff. I think that the Bama visit hasn't seemed, because he's tried to set Bama a couple times and it just never seems like a visit really actually officially materialized. So I think going forward that it's a Florida LSU battle. You've got all these guys with ties to the state of Louisiana from coaching, from ULL staff that Napier brought along. You've got Corey Raymond, like you said, a guy that, was recruiting him to LSU, has a really good relationship with him from when he was at LSU. And both of those guys, Napier and Corey Raymond, both, as soon as they were hired at Florida, boom, they're recruiting, Jacoby Matthews really hard. So I think that's a guy, you're battling out LSU. LSU's taken a lot of transfer portal guys in the defensive backfield.
I was going to ask you
I don't know that that's something that's going to deter them from their interest because, Jacoby Matthews, again, you've got a top 40 type of playmaker.
Yeah, you take a step.
That you're going to have for 4 minutes.
But it could impact him.
Sure. And where Florida has a big need, and I think the biggest question that Matthews is wanting to get answered this weekend is, how do I fit in your defense? What's the defense going to look like? It's not so much of spending time in Gainesville or, yes, spending time with the coaching staff is important, but I think more of X's and O's talks. How am I going to fit? How am I going to be used? How are you going to get me this next level? How are you going to elevate my game? All those types of things are the big questions that he has. 4-star athlete who's more of a hybrid type of tight end guy. Arlis Boardingham. He's going to be coming out from the state of California, going to visit Oregon after Florida. It's those two teams that are really kind of the big ones involved. Miguel Mitchell, another guy who's been a kind of a late riser as a senior. He's a former Vanderbilt commit, but has landed a ton of offers. Florida and Tennessee seem to be battling out for him. Caleb Douglas, I think, is the one guy that I think is really one to watch this weekend. I don't know as far as a decision, but I think that he could alter the timeline of wanting to commit sometime around February 1st to maybe moving that timeline up, because he's going to be able to see Florida for the first time. He's heading into this visit with Florida leading, was committed to USC at one point where Kerry Colbert, Florida's now wide receivers coach, was an assistant coach. So all those ties together and all those things, it kind of seems like everything's kind of aligning for Florida. So I think he's one to watch. They're going to have a lot of other kids on campus this weekend. They'll have a couple of the guys that committed, like a Jalen Farmer who didn't sign, a couple signees who were able to take a second official visit that did sign in December. So it's going to be a big weekend. Right now I have 11 guys on the official visitor list. That's kind of more of an expected official visitor list as I kind of turn over every rock going forward to where Friday is. You always have those kind of late additions. The transfer portal is obviously booming so much. So we'll see if that list expands right now. But right now, Florida's sitting at 11 guys coming in this weekend, which is a pretty big visit weekend, especially for the month of January since the early signing periods happened. Like I always say, man, it's always kind of been like January is so boring in recruiting. You're just kind of sitting there like,
the last couple of years.
What am I going to do? Like, man, I got to figure out a way to generate some kind of buzz or some kind of interest on the site. Like everyone's just sitting here asking me like why it's so boring. And that's not the case this year. So it's an exciting time, at least for me.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, if you want to talk about Billy Napier's approach going into the early signing period, it's almost, I don't know whether this is an intended benefit, and that's one of the reasons they were selective early on or not. But when you get 11 official visitors on campus in January, and a lot of these guys are high-profile guys like you talked about, you're going to create
It's not like
some buzz.
Bunch of guys where you have to Google, like, who the hell is this guy?
Right. And, if an Alabama or an LSU already has, the majority of their class full and they're only looking to fill 2 or 3 spots, you're probably not going to have as many guys on campus. It's, that goes both ways. You can spend more time with those individual prospects, but there very much is, in my opinion, a sense of when you get a lot of guys on campus and can generate some buzz, that's a big deal. I mean, you obviously saw Dan Mullen and his staff try to do that with that, that early June visit try. But I mean, coming out of those visits, a lot of guys were hyped. I go back.
They definitely were.
It made no sense to do that early.
Those guys did have the time where, yes, when you look back, the visits, a lot of those guys ended up elsewhere. But while those guys were on campus, they were able to sit and have conversations of, man, like, what if we all teamed up, all of us 5-star guys, high 4-star guys, teamed up and came to Florida, we could beat Alabama. Those were the types of conversations that those guys had. Didn't work out in the end, like I said.
Yeah.
But there's no negativity. I mean, that's what you want out of a visit. You want these guys hyped.
I thought they screwed up the timing. Around. Like, I thought they should not have gone so big on the first weekend because then other programs are following up, right after. The visit high wears off. And I think that's the good thing about having a weekend like this is, you get 1 or 2 of those guys to commit or think about committing. All of a sudden, you're towards the end of the process, right? Not the beginning. So you're kind of leaving a great last impression. And I think that's something that Florida can really take advantage of this weekend. Blake,
definitely.
I don't want to keep you too long because, one, I don't want to give away all the juice that you've been posting on Swamp 24/7 on recruiting. And guys, if you're not on Swamp 24/7, be sure to check it out. Blake is absolutely all over recruiting. Is keeping you up to date with who shows up, who's expected to show up, who has changed plans. I know Blake put out a story earlier about one visitor that is not coming anymore, and kind of what that can mean. He does a great job of keeping you kind of in the loop. And as much as we like to share on this YouTube channel and on the podcast platforms, we are a paid subscription site, and I think a lot of our members get value out of that. So Blake will keep you updated throughout the weekend. Anything else, Blake, before we sign off here?
Not that I can think of. It's definitely, this weekend is the big weekend for Florida as far as official visits go. They're going to have some other guys going forward in the month of January coming to campus for official visits. We'll obviously get into those as, those weekends close in. But I'm excited to get this class wrapped up, going forward. Just excited to have the contact period opening back up. Seeing what these guys have to say about Coach Napier and his other guys on the staff with him coming in and working in the living room. I like to see the feedback of how these in-home visits go. How can some of these new coaches that maybe I'm not familiar with from December see how they can work a living room, because that's how you get an idea of how these guys are going to start closing things out during these in-home visits. So I'm interested. I think that's one of the more interesting things I'm looking forward to seeing, once things open up. That dead period does open up this coming Friday, June 14th. Once the clock strikes midnight. Well, gosh, January 14th.
Been a long week.
Once it strikes January of the 14th on this Friday, things will be back open. The contact period will be back open again.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, Blake. And then on the other side of that, January 18th, team reports for winter conditioning, and that whole program begins. And then we're really going to find out, from some of our sources on the team and whatnot, how Billy Napier is received, because, anytime there's a coaching change, I know it happened when Nick Savage came in, and, it breathes fresh life into your program. Now, good or bad, players have to accept it and be willing to buy in, but generally that happens if you have good leadership, and, we'll certainly find out. So there's a lot to look forward to in the coming weeks, guys. Keep it locked in on Swamp 24/7. Blake will have you covered with this weekend's official visitors, and
if I live,
if he survives the craziness. And obviously, we will be tapping into sources as Florida begins to start up its winter conditioning program ahead of spring football and get you all the juice on that. So thank you guys for tuning in. That'll do it for today's episode of the Swamp 24/7 podcast.